Grizzco, or Grizzco Industries, is a shady company full of secrecy, unsafe and dangerous working conditions which go against labor laws, and very inhumane treatment of the salmonids. But let's look back at where all of this started and how this very dangerous company came to be. Twilight years of humanity's last moments had been very tumultuous, marked by no fewer than 5 world wars and countless lesser conflicts. During the last of these world wars, a nuclear warhead hit the South Pole. The resulting atomic fireball melted the Antarctic ice cap, causing sea levels that had already risen to dangerous levels from years of global warming and a series of volcanic eruptions to reach catastrophic levels. Despite the attempts of a handful of survivors to hide away from the ensuing flood in underground cities or enter cryogenic stasis in hope that they could reclaim their world, mankind was all but extinct. However, one underground shelter called Alterna, built within a gigantic volcanic crater, had managed to survive and rebuild their civilization to some extent. As the last remaining humans tried to rebuild their civilization, they discovered that the squids in the underground sea surrounding their home had body fluids that could be refined into a liquid crystal that reacted to the thoughts and feelings of sentient life, projecting images that reflected their desires. However, an attempt to leave their crater and recolonize the surface with the aid of a rocket ended in disaster when the rocket overloaded the crystals and caused a cave-in that wiped out the remaining humans. The liquid crystals would disperse into the water, and as the marine life was exposed to them, they were infused with humanity's desires and lingering emotions. And these very same crystals, knowing the potent abilities they had, were used to experiment on animals, all different kinds of animals, in a project called Arc Polaris. Arc Polaris was a spaceship said to carry many of these experimented on animals that were put into cryosleep. The main objective for the Arc Polaris was to search space for another inhabitable planet in hopes that humanity can spring up once again. Considering the circumstances of its launch, the Polaris had a smooth voyage until it reached the edge of the solar system. It was at that point that debris struck the vessel, damaging its navigation system. The crew was able to turn the ship around and head back towards Earth, but the effort was in vain. There was not enough fuel to attempt a landing. The Arc Polaris drifted aimlessly through space for 10,000 years before it ultimately came back to Earth. Eons passed, the once stable orbit of the Polaris decayed over time until the ship found itself in the inescapable pull of the Earth's gravity. Re-entry was not kind to its inhabitants, as they all perished save one, Bear Number 3, an experimental subject who had retained consciousness within his cold hibernation. He had survived. For 12,000 years he had dreamed and plotted. After hibernating for multiple millennium after the crash, Bear Number 3 had finally woken up and came to a terrible realization. He had not landed on a new planet at all. He was back on Earth, and yet it was not an Earth he knew. This Earth, it seems, was dominated by sea creatures. Not a single mammal had been found. In the course of his search for a single fellow mammal, and with the brand new intelligence he had gained from the crystals, Bear Number 3 used navigational equipment from the wreckage of the Arc Polaris to discover Alterna. It was a wasteland, of course, but a few of the liquid crystals that had once covered the walls and ceilings remained. With knowledge built during his thousands of years of dreaming, he repaired some of Alterna's facilities and began researching the crystals. This research into the crystals bore fruit for Bear Number 3. He compounded some of the liquid crystals with his own fur. The experiment created an entirely new substance with one terrifying property. It could transform any living creature into a mammal. Bear Number 3 realized the implications immediately. He could restore the planet to a mammalian paradise, turning every living creature into a mammal. He began stockpiling this fuzzy ooze, as he called it, within Alterna's still intact rocket. For such a venture, he would require the acquisition of thousands of golden eggs, said to be the most prized possessions of the Samanids. These were used in the creation of the fuzzy ooze, although the exact details as to why he needed golden eggs are still unknown. But Bear number 3 had a plan. He founded a corporation that would go on to employ locals to collect these golden eggs for him. In going under the new name Mr. Grizz, this corporation was then came to be known as Grizzco Industries. With fuzzy ooze production peaking thanks to the assistance of unsuspecting inklings and octolings, Mr. Grizz took the final steps to set his plans in motion. The rocket was loaded, and it would not be long now. Grizzco quickly became a booming business as a quick way for inklings and octolings to make a little bit of extra cash, but the main motive behind Grizzco is very secret. Grizzco itself has a myriad of aspects commonly associated with Japanese toxic workplaces, also known as black companies. The business itself is dangerous and questionably legal, with equipment that obviously do not hold up to safety regulations. One example are his Grizzco weapons that he had manufactured himself. When issuing these, he issues a statement asking workers not to steal them or alert the media to their existence under the threat of immediate termination of their employment, likely because he is afraid that if the media figures this out, he will be shut down because these weapons are illegally manufactured. Furthermore, the shifts became a lot more labor intensive. They went from irregularly scheduled, as seen in Splatoon 2, to seemingly never ending in Splatoon 3, and don't seem to be in compliance with any labor laws whatsoever. To add on to the unprofessionalism, the employee handbook is messy and has scribbles all over it. And the recruitment commercial advertises the company using vague platitudes like change the world and creating the future instead of specifically describing what the job entails. This honestly covering up any dangerous aspects and implying a vague corporate structure. In addition, in the Japanese version, Mr. Grizz speaks with a veneer of unnerving politeness towards his employees and occasionally says vague, abstract things about the sea, which is evocative of bosses in such companies attempting to placate their staff with ostensible politeness in order to distract from the shadiness of the job. The business model itself is also very predatory. The company hires anyone and everyone without checking for qualifications or experience, no type of background check whatsoever, and the turnover rate is high, with employees being picked up and dropped on a whim, resulting in most of the employees being easily preyed upon desperate young teenagers. Furthering this, the payment method also reflects some of the shady business practices of real-life pachinko companies in Japan. Payment bonuses being handed out in capsules, which the Inkopolis Square branch has its employees redeem via a booth separate from the building itself, is a reference to the three-store system, a well-known way for pachinko parlors to skirt around Japanese laws regarding gambling for cash. The system involves the pachinko parlor making its payout to players using prizes instead of cash, therefore allowing it to pass itself off as a game center instead of a gambling parlor, but also conveniently being next to a pawn shop and wholesaler that allows pachinko players to cash in their prizes and circulate the prize back to the parlor. Further evoking this is the fact that in Splatoon 2, the player can swap out gear duplicates for cash in the same way a pachinko parlor would swap out a prize. So what is the main purpose of Grizzco? The main objective of Grizzco is to recruit and employ young inklings and octolings to go out and collect as many golden eggs as they can so that Mr. Grizz can further continue creating his fuzzy ooze. Now these shifts take place during a very critical point for the Samanids. This is when Samanids regularly return in large numbers from their habitat to where they first spawned, with the young ones doing so in order to mature. This is a behavior called a salmon run. Salmon runs are when the Samanids are most vulnerable and exploitative. And in order to protect themselves from these salmon run shifts, the Salmonids made a trade agreement with the Octarians. In exchange for weaponry and gear to protect themselves, the Salmonids give the Octarians their power eggs in order for them to provide a source of power for their underground civilizations. Since its inception, Grizzco has basically become an invasive predator to the Salmonids, causing them to undergo massive and most likely painful changes. Boss Salmonids and lesser Salmonids constitute the same species. What appearance young Salmonids will reach in maturity is determined by the environment they are raised in. Those who are raised in a harsher environment become boss Salmonids. Steelheads and moths have bigger bodies, while scrappers and steel eels have higher intelligence. Some boss Salmonids, such as flyfish and fish sticks, consist of lesser Salmonids that have gone through specific training. And under the most stressful conditions, such as the salmon runs, even king Salmonids emerge. And with this massive influx of golden eggs, Mr. Grizz can finally set his plans in motion. With the help of DJ Octavio and with the evolution of Small Fry into Huge Fry, Mr. Grizz is defeated. However, after all of this has happened, Mr. Grizz is still seen floating out in space, as well as Grizzco still up and running as if nothing happened. Perhaps Mr. Grizz had some help from the outside to keep his plan going all along.